To expound a little about our timelines, or to emphasize them a little bit better and how they relate to our food movements, it's very important to understand that we need to do whatever we can to lessen our ecological footprint as quickly as possible, because we're in this overshoot mode, and again, we're demanding more of our planet's resources than what it can supply. And we're essentially borrowing resources from future generations, which I don't believe is ethical. So it brings up this other dimension of ethics. It's not really an issue of how we're treating domesticated animals so much as it is, and that's always been an argument, how the life and death, how we're treating in terms of the life and death of animals that we're raising and then slaughtering for food. But ethics for me takes on a much, much greater dimension. For instance, we need to apply ethics across the board to all biodiversity that we're affecting, and all loss of all animals, whether they're wildlife or domesticated. And also we have to take into consideration how our choices are affecting future generations. We're essentially borrowing resources now that future generations will not have. And so with any food movement that continues perpetuating the livestock or fishing industries, the meat, dairy, fishing industries, basically any industry that perpetuates the use of animals to raise, slaughter, and then consume, or their products, is using resources inefficiently. So I like to term this more that we need to view it in terms of relative or optimal relative sustainability. That'll have to work, because we need to look at how we best can use our resources. For instance, how can we best use our resources? Which resources will contribute the least to climate change? Which resources will be the best for our own human health? Which resources will use the least amount of, which food sources will use the least amount of our resources, and which are the most compassionate, all wrapped up into one package. So we especially need to look at this in terms of what animal product is then optimally relatively sustainable as compared to any plant-based foods. And that's the way we need to start viewing things as we start running out of resources and need to change our ways to create a more sustainable future. So any food movement that then has any type of animal product that's associated with it has some form of inefficiencies. And in the past, I would say, before 1973, when we started moving into an overshoot mode, I would say, well, this was less of a problem for most people looking at it. It would be more of an issue, what's on your plate in terms of animal welfare, what it's doing to our own human health. But as of today, the most important topic that we can possibly address is how we can create a state of sustainability. In fact, at this stage, I need to go one step further and say that we need to look beyond sustainability, that we need to start rejuvenating, regenerating our planet in various areas or geographical areas of our planet. And the only way to do this in as quickly as possible fashion would be by raising plant-based foods, and by changing certain regions of the world to agroforestry, regions that can replace our soil, regenerate various aspects of our biosphere. The reason that sustainability is the most important topic that we can possibly address as a civilization is because today we're in what is termed an overshoot mode, meaning we're taking more of our planet's resources than what it can supply. In fact, today it would require approximately 1.6 Earths to sustain what we're currently taking from and doing to our planet in the United States, and in certain countries overseas, Australia and a few others. It would require 5 full Earths to support our current lifestyle. And the single industry, the single sector most responsible across the board of all of our resources that are being depleted, as well as contributions to climate change, can be blamed squarely on animal agriculture. It's a single, even though other industries contribute to this picture, animal agriculture across the board is comprehensively the largest contributor to all aspects of our unsustainability. Whether we're talking about climate change, loss of fresh water, or freshwater scarcity, land use changes, loss of biodiversity and rapid rate of extinctions, and our state of our oceans and loss of sea life and habitat, world hunger, our own human health, pollution, all those aspects of what I term global depletion related to our sustainability of our own species and other species. Animal agriculture is the largest single contributing industry to all those aspects of global depletion. One quick comment about topsoil. Today, there's a very large movement about how to replenish topsoil and how infertile our topsoil is. Well, over half of the topsoil on Earth has already been lost in certain regions, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where we're doing some projects with some world hunger projects. More than 2/3 of the topsoil has been lost. Now, typically, with many movements today, especially there's one in particular that is projected to help topsoil be replenished, and that's with grass-fed livestock, or something called permaculture, or carbon farming, Alan Savory's techniques, holistic management. There are a lot of different names for it, agroforestry, but with livestock. But essentially, we're going to be hearing more and more about these in the future, but essentially these are all movements, agricultural movements, to help support the livestock industry by the continuation of cattle and pigs and chickens on pastures, so that they feel that not only do we need those items from a human health standpoint, but more importantly with my topic, that it's needed from an environmental standpoint. And the fact remains is that the quickest way to regenerate our topsoil and to rejuvenate areas that have been desertified is by, again, reforesting them and with plant-based agricultural systems, and simply place indigenous species. And this has been done in a number of areas in the world, especially in the Amazon area, where certain areas have been desertified. And basically, it's bringing back life, bringing back topsoil, bringing back microclimates by reintroducing forests that have been cleared unnecessarily, primarily for livestock or for animal agriculture, or for crops to feed livestock elsewhere. One important point to note is that 45% of all the ice-free terrestrial landmass on Earth, 45% is used by livestock. And therefore, knowing that there's a significant resource depletion because of inefficiencies, that the easiest way to regenerate topsoil is simply to use land more efficiently. And many times it requires up to 20 times the land to produce the same amount of what some people would term as food from animal sources as it would from plant-based sources. Now, in any given area of land, you can produce 15 times more protein from plants as you can from animals. And it will, of course, plants will sequester greenhouse gas emissions rather than causing them. And plants typically will use, or animal systems will typically use 50 to 100 times more water in many cases than plant-based systems. A really good way to view this is to take 1 acre of soil and knowing that we're running out of land and we're running out of water and we're creating climate change, all parts of this unsustainability picture that we have. So how can we best use our land for food production, which is what we need to be viewing, how we need to be viewing this in the future. And a good way to look at this is to take 1 acre of land and to grow any food you'd like, and you'd have to ask yourself, what could you grow and what should you grow in the best interest collectively to reduce our collective footprint globally and in terms of ecological footprint. And if you took that 1 acre of land and tried to raise 1 grass-fed cow, first of all, 1 acre is not enough. The average would be 2 to 4. I've seen some that have required 50 acres to support one grass-fed cow. So if you take that acre and you try to raise 1 grass-fed cow, you'd end up with about 50 to 100 pounds of a food that's what you'd call food afterwards, that's then implicated in a number of Western disease states. You've also used about 1 million to 2 million gallons of water, and you've dumped about 6 to 7 tons of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, and you've also displaced other wildlife and biodiversity, versus using that land to grow something like kale, quinoa, fruit, nut, vegetable combination, and you've been able to grow maybe up to 20 to 50,000 pounds of food that's infinitely healthier for you to grow and for our planet, for you to eat, for our planet to grow. Yeah. One of the largest concerns that we have, most people are focused on climate change right now, if they are focused on any sustainability issue whatsoever. And climate change is important, but it's important to understand that climate change is an exacerbator. It takes events and makes them worse. For instance, we have a freshwater scarcity issue where the United Nations and other gold standard organizations are predicting that we are going to be in a 40% shortage of freshwater, or freshwater scarcity. We're going to have a 40% shortage in freshwater by the year 2030. And it's been declared by the World Economic Forum that freshwater scarcity is, according to them, the #1 concern that we have as a civilization over the next 10 years. It's not climate change, it's from freshwater scarcity. And so then we have to view this as that, is it a scarcity issue, or it's how we're using our current resources, and especially fresh water. And one of the largest contributors to freshwater scarcity is animal agriculture. It requires a great deal of water to produce the animal product that's found on our plate. For instance, on average, it requires 2,500 gallons, between 1,800 and 25 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef, about 800 to 1,600 gallons, depending on who you're reviewing, what research you're reviewing, to produce 1 pound of pork, and about 500 to 800 gallons to produce 1 pound of chicken, and it requires a fraction of that, sometimes up to 1/50th of that, to produce 1 pound of a plant-based product. So also, you combine this with the fact, the inefficiencies, you combine that with the fact that 27% of all the fresh water consumed in the world is being used by livestock. So it seems that, the easiest manner, the quickest manner in which we can reduce our water footprint as part of our ecological footprint is to simply choose those foods that use the least amount of water, the least amount of land, produce the least amount of greenhouse gases in terms of climate change contribution, and at the same time are the healthiest for us to consume and displace the least amount of biodiversity or other species that we share this planet with. As we view food, I think we need to be looking at our responsibility as stewards of this planet. For instance, if we are in an overshoot mode, using more of our planet's resources than what it can supply, it seems that it's our inherent duty to do what we can to reduce that footprint and do it in the quickest way possible. What we have to do then, I believe, is to start looking at things outside of self, outside of how its effect directly on us. For instance, we can't really force somebody to change their dietary patterns to reduce their own risk of heart disease. We can't really force somebody to do that, and we can't really force anybody to be empathetic in terms of their concern for the infliction of pain on other beings, other animals that we slaughter. Whether they're grass-fed or not, they still go through the same slaughtering process. And I'm talking about fish as well as any other type of species that we happen to consume. So I think it's time we start looking outside of self, because the fact is that whether you or I want to change for our own sake, we now have to change for other individuals, other people in our civilization and other beings' sake, and otherwise we are creating mass extinctions, and we're creating massive loss of biodiversity, and we are jeopardizing our own future as a species. In fact, In fact, we're losing other species at a rate of about 1,000 to 10,000 times the background rate, that which we've seen for the previous several thousands of years, which used to be about 2 to 4 species going extinct per year. Well, scientists have basically stopped trying to estimate the exact number of species going extinct per year because there's so many. Now it's just the rate of extinction because we're losing so many species. And most scientists agree that the principal reason for rapid rate of loss of species and biodiversity, this rapid rate of extinction that we haven't seen since the dinosaurs were lost 65 million years ago, most scientists are in agreement that the single principal reason across the 5 leading drivers of species loss, meaning habitat loss of habitat and invasive species, and there are 5 main drivers. The leading cause of all 5 drivers combined is animal agriculture, livestock on land, and by overfishing in our oceans.